Good evening, I'm Manoranjana, and this is The Last Word. Today's episode is a rather special episode. I'd like to start by reading a short excerpt from Ink, Saffron and Freedom, my father Kedar Nath Gupta's recently released memoir. The fear of being subjected to violence did not stop me either during the emergency 50 years ago, and it wasn't going to stop her from laying the foundation of satellite television news as well as FM radio in the northeastern regions of the country. Like father, like daughter, the baton is in her hands now, and I feel lighter. That her is me. The daughter he raised with ink on her fingers and fire in her voice. Today I carry forward his mission. The baton is in my hands now, and I will not drop it. Today is the 25th of June, and exactly 50 years ago, democracy in India was gasping for air. A country that had prided itself on its constitution, its freedom, its press, suddenly went dark. At 5 minutes past 12 on June 26, 1975, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency across India. What followed wasn't just a crackdown on dissent. It was a slow suffocation of the soul of this country. And today we remember it not just as an act of historical memory, but as a warning of how fragile our freedoms are and how deeply personal the fight for them must be. Let me take you back. It all started with a courtroom. The Allahabad High Court had found Indira Gandhi guilty of electoral malpractice. Two specific violations: misuse of government machinery and appointment of a gazetted officer as her election agent. Her seat from Raebareli was in question. Her power was in peril. She did not step down. Instead, she struck back. A midnight knock, not on the doors, but on democracy itself. Emergency was declared, opposition leaders were jailed, more than 40,000 RSS workers were locked up, over 7,000 journalists were arrested. The press was censored, terrorized, and in many cases shut down. And the newly minted chief press advisor became the de facto editor of every newspaper in India. At that time, my father worked at the Motherland, one of the few papers bold enough to publish an afternoon supplement announcing the arrest of opposition leaders like Jayaprakash Narayan and Atal Bihari Vajpayee. The same day, police raided the newspaper's office, and within 48 hours, the editorial integrity of Indian journalism had been shackled. My father writes, while many papers suffered lockouts almost overnight after the emergency was declared, others evaded closure despite refusing to submit to Gandhi's guidelines. While these guidelines were enforced with the might of the state machinery, including the police and the newly established chief press advisor, in an attempt to muzzle and leash the press, some papers were simply too stubborn and were going to just raise their arms and surrender. Some of these were too loud to be silenced, and in their company stood the Motherland. The Motherland was in the service of the nation and had no interest in a tame existence where it was denied its right to speak the truth to its readers. Eventually, however, even the Motherland could not escape the grip of Gandhi's regime. With the closure of our office and the suspension of our publication, I felt a growing anxiety about the future of the state and the extent to which Gandhi was willing to take her nefarious scheme to keep herself planted within the Prime Minister's office. Gandhi, however, couldn't care less and ridiculed the trust and better judgment of the people to realize her desires through the convenience of the Constitution's controversial emergency provision. Despite this, my father carried on. As a father, he worried, and as a journalist, he endured. My hope and optimism may have taken a blow when I learnt about the time my daughter Manoranjana, a journalist, herself barely managed to escape from 10 rounds of bullet fired allegedly by terrorist organization Ulfa using AK-47 guns in 2006 when she was running her TV channels in Assam. My contemporaries and I are no strangers to deliberations about retreating into a safer line of work, and to imagine the reality of Manoranjana grappling with a similar dilemma was heart-wrenching. However, my daughter, like me, did not yield. When the dust settled and the air cleared, she returned to what she does best. The fear of being subjected to violence did not stop me either during the emergency 50 years ago, and it wasn't going to stop Manoranjana from laying the foundation of private satellite television news as well as private FM radio in the northeastern region of the country. Like father, like daughter, the baton is in her hands, and I feel lighter. And that perhaps is the most powerful inheritance, not the legacy of ink, but of courage. Civil liberties vanished. Article 19, the one that guarantees freedom of speech and expression, was suspended. Preventive detention laws were misused. The Maintenance of Internal Security Act MISA became a tool of intimidation. Thousands were detained without trial. Many didn't even know why they were picked up. All they knew was that someone, somewhere, had decided that they were inconvenient for them. And if the emergency broke the back of institutions, it tried to break the will of the people. Forced sterilization drives were carried out in the name of population control. Slums were bulldozed to clean up the capital. The poor were punished for being visible. Their homes, their dignity, their choices, all collateral damage in a campaign that had little and scant regard for human rights. It was censorship not just in law, but in spirit. If you weren't sure whether a paragraph would upset Indira Gandhi, you were told to check with your nearest press advisor. What was the result? Every sentence was filtered through fear. But even that didn't always work. Some papers like Indian Express and The Statesman would leave their editorial pages blank, a quiet scream and a silent protest. Meanwhile, RSS activists died in custody. Nanaji Deshmukh, the towering intellect of the Sangh, was hunted down and jailed. George Fernandez ran in lungi and chappals to escape arrest. And my father, along with his peers, was offered a choice: self-censor or disappear. And he chose neither. For those of us who grew up hearing these stories at the dinner table, the emergency was never abstract. It was personal. It was the shadow that loomed over every conversation about press freedom, every editorial decision, and every act of journalism. And today, as I speak to you from this platform, I carry that shadow and that responsibility. Because history isn't just what we inherit, it's what we choose to carry forward. My father didn't find the emergency to become a footnote. He did it because he believed that truth matters, that facts matter, and that freedom matters. And that belief, that fierce, unshakable belief, is why I'm here today. Not just to remember the past, but to warn against repeating it. So to the younger generations watching this, you must know this. Authoritarianism rarely arrives with a bang. It creeps in through fear, through apathy, through the quiet erosion of norms. It doesn't need tanks on the streets. Sometimes all it needs is silence. And I say, don't give in to that silence. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Print the inconvenient facts. Protect the unpopular opinions, because that's how democracies survive. Not through grand speeches, but through ordinary courage. And to my fellow journalists, don't wait for history to judge you. Judge yourself now. Are you doing justice to your readers and viewers? Are you amplifying the powerless? Are you speaking truth to power even when it's risky? My father often says journalism is less about writing and more about remembering. Recalling what happened, remembering what was lost, and remembering who refused to give in. Today, I remember my father and his work. I remember the generation that refused to bend. And I remember the emergency not as a chapter we've closed, but as a warning that still flickers beneath the surface. We must never forget, because forgetting is how it begins again. My father wrote, ये लिखना जरूरी है, लोगों को याद रहना चाहिए. It's been 50 years, and how much have you remembered? Today, Ink, Saffron and Freedom is more than a book. It's a reminder that a free press is not a gift, it is a weapon, and also a responsibility. That journalism is not a job, it's a dharma. That democracy is not guaranteed, it's a daily fight. And to the young journalists watching this, don't believe for a second that we are past that era. No democracy is permanently safe. Vigilance is not paranoia. Questioning power is not treason. It is patriotism of the highest order. The emergency was not just a political event, it was a social rupture. Artists, poets, lawyers, doctors, all were silenced. Sterilizations were carried out in the name of population control. Slums were bulldozed in the name of national interest. Civil liberties were shredded. The constitution was twisted. And yet, we endured. We remembered who we were. We voted Indira Gandhi out of power in 1977. And in that vote was the soul of India reborn. That's what makes India, despite its flaws, a living, breathing democracy. Not its rulers, but its people. The same people who stood in queues, not just to vote, but to be heard. Who remembered the silence of the emergency and chose to break it with a ballot. Who knew that freedom wasn't just a slogan, but a responsibility. That moment in 1977 was not just a rejection of authoritarianism, it was a reaffirmation of the Indian spirit. The belief that no matter how dark the night, this country will find a way to speak. And often it speaks through its people. And so I end just as I began, with my father's words. The scars that I carry should serve as a reminder of the importance of a free press in upholding the pillars of democracy. They should remind the next generation of journalists that the pen will always be mightier than the sword. If you haven't yet got your hands on Ink, Saffron and Freedom, I urge you to. Because history isn't just in the textbooks, it's in the lived memory of those who stood up when silence was safer. My father's memoir is one such act of remembrance and resistance. On the 50th anniversary of emergency, it stands as both a chronicle and a call to arms. A reminder that when institutions fail, it is individual courage that keeps democracy alive. This was the first special episode of The Last Word. To those who remember and to those who still care, I thank you. Jai Hind.